Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Whano's Whoscussion. I'm that random guy from Whano, and we've got the beautiful Harriet Skelly. He's even got some wonderful intro music happening there, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's great. Hello.
On today's Whoscussion, just because it's the holiday period, we've gone for a nice cruisy episode. It's going to be not much of a review or a synopsis, but just more of a sort of a talk or a rant, if you wish, over the first ever season of Doctor Who, 1963 to 64.
23rd of November.
Yes, the 23rd of November, 1963. Unfortunately, not many people were actually watching in the beginning because Kennedy was assassinated.
No, it was a poor choice. Well, it wasn't really a poor choice, I guess. It was bad timing.
Bad timing. Rather bad timing on their part there.
Wrong time, wrong place.
Yeah, but the Ninth Doctor was there, so which is quite interesting that the Ninth Doctor was there, and without Rose, which raises a whole lot of questions because the episode. Anyway, that's the wrong season. That's the wrong series one. So season 1, we're starting off with an Unearthly Child. Now we have touched on this, but not gone really in depth on an Unearthly Child in Whoscussion in the past. An Unearthly Child, as Harriet Skelly actually mentioned a couple of podcasts ago, the first episode was definitely a hit, but when the cavemen come in, I wouldn't say it's bad, and I think it was brave of them to do, especially in a heavily Christian society that England is. For them to do an episode about cavemen, I think was pretty brave, and quite ballsy for Verity Lambert to do, actually.
Well, I guess it was because the whole idea originally was that it was meant to be a fantastical sci-fi that's not like the other sci-fis they had, where if you go back and if you go and watch the 50th special, the Adventure in Space and Time, it really goes into exactly what the idea set was going on at the time, where they wanted to make a sci-fi, but not one of the like real American ones where they had that
bug-eyed aliens,
the bug-eyed aliens, and the robots that had like the glass over top of a bunch of circus tree sort of look. That real 60s sci-fi stuff. So they were going for something sci-fi, but not on that level. So they were going. The first thing they wanted to do was go back in time instead. And really, when you think go back in time, you think dinosaurs, cavemen, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But of course, I imagine at the time they were probably like, we cannot make it look like there are dinosaurs on the television. So let's just do cavemen.
Let's do cavemen. Apparently, the first working script, from what I've been looking online, was actually supposed to be the Giants story.
Ah, right.
Which is interesting.
I mean, that's not really not very sci-fi. Seems more fantasy.
I have to agree with you there. What I thought was interesting about An Unearthly Child is they actually had the pilot already filmed, and then Sidney Newman told them to do it again. And that was very lucky because apparently Sidney Newman would do that for nobody. But he really believed Verity Lambert could make this work, this Doctor Who. And she shone, as far as I'm concerned. She did very, very well.
Well, she created a show that's lasted 50 years, I think.
Yeah.
Really proves the point.
Warwick Hussein? Yeah, definitely.
Go down in history, those guys.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Especially with the actual 50th anniversary, the Adventure in Space and Time. That was very, very, very good dedication to them.
Yes.
So, in the Unearthly Child, everything's set up. We don't know who the Doctor is. Susan says, we're from another time, another world. And doesn't really let on as to what she means by that.
Not at all.
I think it was a very brave choice on their part to go this route um, and make the main characters aliens. I think was pretty brave, especially since Sydney Newman. He wanted it to be. Well, he was actually told to make it an educational children's show. That never ended up happening.
Well, kind of. It kind of did for a couple of things, like later episodes in the series, especially particularly, such as like Marco Polo, the Aztecs, stuff like that, where it's the ones where they go back in time. They sort of explore particular fictional events and the way that those people were. So it was sort of like a sort of a History Channel-esque stuff before the. Well, I mean, that's sort of what happened now as well, is that they added aliens into the History Channel. But
aliens, man.
So it's sort of how it really was. And a lot of the time they tried to push on more technical stuff as well, where the problems that arise in certain situations are socio-economic ones, such as in Marco Polo and in the Aztecs, as well as scientific ones such as the Daleks, where they like push them off of their static plating to stop them from getting power. That's a real scientific solution to a scientific problem. So
yeah, definitely. I liked that the that actually brings us on to the second story, the Daleks. Now, just before we move on, we've got Ian and Barbara, and Ian and Barbara are essentially our point of view characters, and with them, we follow them essentially. It's their story, their adventure with these two aliens that they happen to come upon, and they are the audience's gateway into the show because they're not speaking biobabble. They are speaking very contemporary Earth, ideals, and I love that they don't believe the Doctor and Susan. They think they're so full of crap, and so it's so 60s and it's so British to just not believe what these two people are saying. They're like, hey, look, you guys are like clearly making this up. You might want to start doing that. And
they're definitely the very. It plays into the way the companions were from them, is that every time the Doctor takes on a companion, they're supposed to be the human element, and that's because of what Ian and Barbara did the first time. Is that they were the people that you were supposed to relate to. You're not supposed to try and relate to Susan or the Doctor unless you have a complex.
Fana, can you turn
otherwise, it's supposed to be Ian and Barbara, the people
off loudspeaker, please?
You sees you in yourself when you're watching the show. So
yeah, definitely. I like when we come over to the Daleks, which is our second story. It went against what Sydney Newman said. Sydney Newman said, "I don't want bug-eyed monsters."
Yeah,
and Verity Lambert was like, "This isn't bug-eyed monsters. They are creatures that walk around in biomechanical suits."
Yep.
And he wasn't happy. He was most definitely against
the whole idea.
The whole idea, and it ended up being a hit. It was the most successful introduction of a science fiction monster apparently in television history. The Daleks hold that record. And when you see the Daleks, the first time you're ever introduced to them is at the end of the first episode of the Dalek story.
Yep. And
it's just the silhouette and Barbara being frightened. And now it's interesting because Barbara's she's a strong woman, and that's established in the first arc, the Unearthly Child. So for her to be scared, I mean, I wasn't exactly alive in the 60s, but you can see what the mindset would have been for people watching television at the time, because there was nothing like this. There was only one channel on television, and your strong lead is pooing their pants on television, and you're thinking to yourself, what the hell's happening here? And when you finally see the Daleks, I can see from the 60s they would have been a threat, they would have been seen as very, very scary because
Yeah.
it's a post-war era television.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but looking at the Daleks from a modern point of view, they are rather silly looking.
Yes. Those
Uh,
pepper shakers.
yeah. Which is funny because apparently there was a wife, or I suppose a urban legend that they were based on pepper pots. But a recent interview with the individual who actually designed the original Daleks said that there was a complete poppycock.
Fair enough.
That isn't where the Daleks design came from. And the Daleks is quite interesting because you get introduced to the Thals, who were again appeared in Genesis the Daleks, and we spoke about that in one of our previous stories. But they're so sort of like useless.
Yeah,
they're only in the story to be cannon fodder.
Yeah. It was pretty amusing that whole thing. I mean, the whole Dalek story, even at this point, is really grabs you when you really think about it. That there's a race, two races on a planet, and one of them, after years and years of civilization and stuff, one of them ends up being the hyper intelligent scientific race, and the other one ends up being a less intelligent, more farm hunter gatherer sort of species. Like they've like devolved because of what happened. So it is a very interesting circumstance that the Daleks and Skaro finds itself in.
Yeah, I love that the world's petrified as well.
Mm.
They find that the whole world's petrified, and I love that there were animals on Skaro that were metal.
Yes.
And Ian's just like, there can't have been a metallic life form. And the Doctor's like, well, maybe not on your planet, mate, but obviously here they are. And Ian just can't wrap his head around it. And he just refuses to believe the Doctor. He's like, nope, you're full of shit. And then that's such a human response to the situation. And I really love that about Ian. As we said in our Aztecs review, Ian's pretty amazing.
Ian is just so good.
I love how Ian's just like, look, you guys need to fight back, and they're like, oh no, we've become pacifists since the war, and so Ian decides to take that woman. He's like, I'm gonna take your woman, and then the guy's like, no, not my woman, please, I'll do anything. And Ian's like, see, you actually need to be violent.
I want to. If we manage to get Ian back at some point, I want to see him, even as an older man, just hit somebody. I want to see him do it. I want to see the Ian again punch some alien in the face.
Just this 93-year-old, William Russell just punching someone in the head.
Yep. I want to see it. I want to see it real bad.
So I can see it now. Actually, they're probably going to do it, and I reckon Titan Comics will do it, bro. They'll do it with that 93-year-old Ian Chesterton just punching people in the left, right, and center. I really, really dislike going off topic here a little bit, but how Russell T Davies wrote that Ian and Barbara never aged.
What?
Yeah, in the Sarah Jane Smith Adventures, when she meets Joe Grant. In Death of the Doctor, Sarah Jane Smith says, oh, there's a couple in England, Ian and Barbara Chesterton, and apparently they haven't aged since the 60s.
Interesting. Okay.
And I was just like, Russell, this is why I'm so happy you're not the showrunner anymore.
Yeah,
it's so stupid. It doesn't make any sense because what would have made that happen? If you watch their entire arc, if anything, they should be sterile because of the Daleks. They get radiation poisoning.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Age of Destruction might explain it, that they were stuck outside of the bounds of the universe.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, even then, like that's kind of sort of a move that people make to say, "Oh, we're never gonna show them on screen again."
Yeah.
Like, that's sort of a move it's really not cool, really, saying that at all. So
Yeah, I personally, I'll never understand why he said that. It's one thing I'll never agree with is just like some of the silliest stuff. But anyway, as you said, moving on to Edge of Destruction,
yes,
it's an entirely TARDIS based story.
yeah, which is quite a risk as well.
Yeah.
Compared to, like, they went from cavemen to a 7 episode long story on the Daleks, all sci-fi, all action basically, and then they go, we're going to do 2 episodes of just in the TARDIS, people, all of our main characters just talking. That's basically what happened. It's quite a risk to take when they already, obviously had some trouble starting off.
Yeah.
So,
well, the reason for this was apparently budgetary issues. They didn't have any money. They already had the TARDIS set, and they just went ahead and added on to it, and while they were waiting for more budget. And what Edge of Destruction, which I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but Edge of Destruction is my favorite TV story.
Yes, we have mentioned this.
Well, it's good. It is my favorite television story, and I really like that it's 2 episodes long. It's really, apart from how they finish it, it is a very good story. The end does completely ruin it, and William Russell and Carolyn Ford both said in a recent interview that was the only thing that they disliked about the story. It's just how easy it was to
fast return.
The fast return switch that's written quite clearly in English.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Is it was written on it?
Yeah, and it's written in English as well. Unfortunately, the reason behind that was because William Hartnell couldn't remember his lines. And so they just wrote it there, and they were like, sure. And in the DVD release, you can actually they were originally in the DVD release going to remove it digitally, but they felt they should leave it in. I agree with them, to be honest, to leave it in, just because that's sort of the beauty of classic Who. It's just some of the things they had to do to get around constraints, and I think there's a lot of charm to the show, and you can retcon it in your own mind. I saw that term that Tumblr's come up with recently, headcanon. Yeah, in my headcanon, it's not written on there. The first Doctor knew what it was.
Yeah. Well, like in my headcanon, he doesn't say at any point in this about how they are possibly at just the beginning of a solar system. In my headcanon, they are actually outside the bounds of the universe, because that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to agree with you there. That does make a lot more sense.
I mean, it's called the Edge of Destruction. I imagined that it's a play on the fact that it's the edge of the universe.
Well, the thing is, it is the end of the universe because they witnessed the Big Bang.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. But I mean, the Doctor in it says at one point that he thinks that they're actually at the beginning of a solar system, rather than just the universe.
I think that was definitely a William Hartnell couldn't remember the line scenario.
Possibly,
which is sad. I mean, William, the whole time he was the Doctor, he was struggling from heavy health issues, and for him to do some of the stuff that was required of being the Doctor, incredible, man. When you think that he was literally dying on set, that's incredible, acting talent, man. Yeah.
He was an amazing man. Just going off of what he did just for Doctor Who. I mean,
especially how he said yes to coming back to the 10th anniversary, even though he was severely ill.
But he was actually dying at that point.
He was just like, I don't actually care. It's the 10th anniversary of the show I made famous, so you guys can't say anything.
I'm sure if we went back in time just before he was about to die and we said, "Hey, can you be in the 100th?" He'd probably be like, "Yes, I will.
Yes, I will.
I'm about to die, but time travel, I'll do it."
I can say to my grandkids, dude, I totally time traveled before I died.
If we ever invent time travel, it needs to be named after something. To do with it needs to be named after William Hartnell. Yeah, instead of it being a flux capacitor, it should be a Hartnell capacitor.
Yeah, here's the Hartnell. I am on board for this.
Yeah, make it so. Make it so. Well, of course, we should move on to the next episode, other than Edge of Destruction. Although, before we actually do that, I now remember that I have some things written down that I would like to point out that happened in that episode.
Yes.
One of them being something that Ian says to the Doctor is, "Frankly, Doctor, and then I'm thinking, frankly, Doctor, I don't give a damn." That's immediately what I think. But he's actually saying, frankly, Doctor, I find it hard to keep up with you. And I'm like, oh, brain, why did you do that? But then there's another one, is that when when he says that he's going to kick Ian and Barbara out of the TARDIS, even while they can't control the doors, Ian says to him, I don't believe you can do that because I don't think you can open the doors. And the Doctor says to him, don't underestimate my power.
Don't underestimate my power.
Oh,
that's amazing.
That even just in the smallest parts, things are ripping off of Doctor Who. Even now.
Yeah, even to this day, Doctor Who is like totally in my head canon. That the Doctor actually met Anakin Skywalker. That's what's happening.
Yeah, the Doctor said that because he had already seen that movie.
Yeah, he's already seen Revenge of the Sith. He's just like the first Doctor accidentally landed in 2005. You don't underestimate my power. You know what, Susan? I'm going to remember that. Grandfather, are you ever going to explain how I got an Earth name? Oh, the comics can do that.
Yes. So, on to Marco Polo.
How sad is it this is missing?
It really is sad. But even just the reconstruction of the still shots is kind of almost enough to really sell the episode, especially if you've got an overactive imagination such as my own. Just seeing the people, the characters, and then listening to the audio is enough for me to piece together what's there. But of course, I really do hope that we get either some form of reconstruction, either by finding the tapes or something like that, or we get it animated, because animation would be fantastic.
Yeah, apparently sort of the only way that animation is going to actually take off is To Entertain have actually started a petition.
Nice.
To find out if fans want it. I'll actually put a link to the petition in this episode of Whoscussion's description. But I just find it interesting that To Entertain have had to go above and beyond BBC to get this made, which is so sad.
Well, I mean, I can understand. I mean, BBC do have a lot of things that they need to do, obviously. And as it seems more and more, it seems like BBC are pushing their funds a little bit, honestly, because it seems like they're doing more than they're able to in a lot of cases. Like a lot of the time, their budgets seem to be very small for a lot of the stuff that they do. And I mean, they're one company that basically does most of the entertainment in England and the United Kingdom. So I can understand that they'd have a bit of trouble doing that. Unlike, TV stations in America where they have countless people watching and countless channels. And even then, there's a whole range of channels that are actually people have to pay for. So it's understandable that there's a bit more of a money difference in the UK compared to America.
Yeah, definitely. Especially since the BBC is, well, I wouldn't say free, but it relies on basically charity to exist, which is so sad because like the BBC offers some of the greatest entertainment mankind has to offer, and
it really does.
And it is regrettable that these sorts of things are happening.
But I'm glad that it's not like sold out to a big company, because I know that if it did, then we would be inundated with bad stuff. Basically, the BBC have remained mostly good because they do it from the bottom of their hearts.
Yeah, definitely. So within Marco Polo, what I absolutely love about this story is it introduces the concept of how the TARDIS translation matrix works, because they say China, and no one has any idea what they're saying. They're like, "What's China?"
What's China?
And she's like, "Oh crap!" And then she says, "Cathay," and they're like, "Oh yeah. You mean China?" And then she's like, "Yeah,
Yeah, China."
yeah. So I really like that. It's probably the most heavily factual historical that they do in the first run. Apart from maybe the Reign of Terror, maybe I've been told that they take a lot of liberties with the Reign of Terror, but
Right.
but they go over Marco Polo. They go over Marco Polo's apparently many adventures, and the Doctor considers taking on this young woman from that time period as a companion.
Ah, yes.
And I'm wondering if that was supposed to be a thing that was actually going to happen, or it was just written into the script just to like have it written into the script. Because I would have really been interested to see what he would do traveling around with a woman from actual ancient China. That would have been medieval China, I suppose, but. I think that would have been something that would have been very good for the series continuity, and it would have offered a lot to maybe the mythos of Doctor Who. Because I'm really really sick of contemporary companions, and there really isn't enough that outside of the contemporary realm when it comes to companions in Doctor Who. I like the actor who played Marco Polo. He actually came back for the reconstructions and did an intro and outro.
Did he? Oh, he did.
Yeah, he did. So this one actually leads us into a huge science fiction story, The Keys of Marinus. Real quick, Vanna, what's up? I'm recording live.
It was quite an interesting one. I don't believe I actually managed to get through the whole thing originally.
She never leaves until 2:45.
What was it? What was it that got me on that?
Was it the Vroods in their jumpsuits?
It may have been. I think it was just I got a bit confused at some point during it. I mean, this was a couple of years ago that I decided to watch it.
Was it the slug brain monsters? Because that confused me too. I must say.
There are a lot of things in this one that did get a bit weird. As there was a lot of science fiction stuff going on in regards to. It seemed like it was a mishmash of some particularly interesting visual things that they were going for, which caused them to create the whole story around particular items, such as that glass beach and the slug thing in the jar.
Yeah, that thing always blows my mind, especially when Barbara ends up like ending it.
Yeah,
it's just like, you won't end me. I've got insane cerebral powers, and Barbara's like, I'm actually going to end you. And he's like, oh, well, I didn't see that coming.
Ended. Yeah.
It's so superb because that monster totally thought he had the upper hand. Keys of Marinus I quite liked because it was super surreal. I've got to think, when it comes to season 1, this is the most surreal. Because they go on like short adventures. It's like different. It's like they went on different episodes in the one story arc. I love that one where the justice system is, if somebody saw you do it, then you did the crime.
Yeah.
And there's like no ands, ifs, or buts.
That's what got me. I remember after watching that episode. I think I realized how that was another one of those episodes where I realized how much future stuff has been taking off from Doctor Who, because pretty much every science fiction or even some just like weird odd fantasy ones have an episode where there's some weird law case going on where the rest of the characters have got to try to save the main character from being convicted of a crime. And then for most sci-fi ones, it's because they're on an alien world, and the alien world says that this person's done something illegally, and then the rest of the crew is or the rest of the main characters are trying to figure out a way in between those laws as to say that they didn't do it, or even that they, even if they did do something and didn't know that it was illegal. So
Yeah,
it seems like the whole that a lot of things nowadays just taking off from Doctor Who so much
yeah,
that
definitely.
I got really lost in that, and I think I sort of was like, I'm not sure how much more I can continue like watching that particular story because of I saw little bits of other shows every time, and then I went back and watched those other shows instead. Like I ended up actually after that lore one, I went back and watched Voyager Star Trek.
Yeah.
Because there is an episode in that where what's her face, the engineer gets in exactly the same situation. So I'm just so much. But otherwise, it was right up until then. I know it was definitely a pretty good episode. Honestly, it took control of the mind when you looked at it, because it was sort of like Great Journey fantasy-esque as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's like I love that the stakes were high the whole time, and I love that there was tons of different sort of mini worlds that they went to. It was
It was
an
yeah.
incredible piece of science fiction television. One thing I thought was bizarre though is why did the Vroods not appear anywhere else on Marinus? Because they're meant to be like the big bad, right?
Who are the Vroods again?
They're the people in the like jumpsuits with the V helmets.
Oh right.
You know that they can swim through the acid ocean. Though
yes.
saying that, they could have in the Keys of Marinus, they actually go to different countries, right? That's what the teleporting device is for. It takes them to different countries on Marinus.
Yeah, it was taking them to different places on.
Yeah, which is so interesting because on a couple of Whoscussions ago, you actually talked about how not many planets in the Whoniverse seem to be biodiverse.
Yeah, but this one definitely was.
Yeah,
there was even to the point of like different cultures being at different levels of civilization.
Yeah,
as well.
That's so interesting because it's like real our planet. There are different cultures at different levels of civilization.
Yeah. Of course, like not as nearly as segregated as this one is.
Yeah, definitely.
But not to like the point where there's like actually like different continents on the planet that have different whole civilizations going on that can almost seem completely unaware of the other ones going on around them. So yeah. It was. It's definitely one of those. As a whole, the story was fantastic. But those ones, the particular stories as parts, were a bit interesting, and sometimes, especially for people nowadays, you'd have to push yourself to get through them individually.
I'm coming.
I think anyway.
No, I'll be there soon.
But of course,
I'll come soon. I
do suggest going back and watching it. It is a fantastic. Even if you just go ahead and watch bits and pieces of individual stories, and then make sure you finish watching the last and first episodes of the story as a whole, because just because there's a lot to this one. It's one of the longer stories that go on. It's there's 2 7 episode long ones. This is the one of the 6 episode long ones. So
it is. I absolutely love that they go to different places with different cultures, and I've always wanted to know why the hell that hasn't happened in Doctor Who since.
Well, I mean, as we've mentioned before, they have a lot of issues with the time that they have for story. Yeah,
definitely.
So
especially New Who.
Yeah. So if in New Who and even just later on Who, they had the ability to, or have and had, and soon to have maybe the ability to do more than one episode per story, even if they go back to the 20-minute long format.
I would love that,
fantastic.
to be honest. That would be amazing.
Because it makes a lot more sense in the way that Doctor Who is handled, honestly. Because it's a science fiction, and science fiction, as we know from movies like the Star Trek movies and from from Star Wars as a whole, we know that science fiction stories cannot be told in 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, definitely. They have to be done over parts.
Yeah, it's very hard to do that, and I can understand that a lot of the time they try, and they do pretty well for a lot of for most episodes, especially the last season in Doctor Who, that they have that ability to do that, but it's obviously very hard when it would be much easier for them if they had a lot more time, even if they just even if you had like a story that just spanned those how they do the half seasons, like if they just do 2 stories for that, and then I don't know. We're getting around that. We're talking about that again, and we're losing track of
our hypotheses. So the next 2 stories we've actually already covered before on Whoscussion, the Aztecs and the Sensorites. So we'll end this off with just thoughts on the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror, I enjoyed, but I think it's my least favorite in season 1.
Fair enough.
It was a pure historical as well, but I don't. The stakes were really, really high, but I feel if I didn't know Doctor Who was going to continue for another 50 years, there are so many moments in this story where the characters were going to get killed.
Yeah.
And if the story wasn't to continue, it was like a series that just ended in 1 season, someone was going to die. It's a really high stakes episode, but I think a lot of that's pulled out from it because I knew Doctor Who would continue. So the only reason I think it's lackluster for me is because as a person watching it in present day Earth, so the future, essentially, I don't see the stakes being as high as they could have been if I didn't know the series was going to continue. I love the locations, I love the sets, I love the use of archival footage to make it look like William Hartnell was actually walking in France. And apparently, it was a William Hartnell body double that did those shots in France.
Well, right on.
It has my favourite scene in the whole of season 1, though, apart from the Susan talking about the censor, talking about Gallifrey. It's got my favourite scene where the Doctor kills a dude and then leaves a penny for the ferryman on his eye. That's so badass. And so to wrap this up, I'll grab your opinions on the Reign of Terror, and then we'll call it a day.
I'm really glad that the final story for this season was a go back in time one, of course, and that it was France, because just people like to take it down on France a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely, especially America.
But they don't.
Right?
Yes, they don't seem to realize that a lot of things that we have today to thank for the French. I mean, even our entire language, when it comes down to it, has been just stripped off of bits of French and other European languages, mainly French, of course. So when they go ahead and do a story based on the French Revolution, which is one of the biggest things that happened in a lot of French history.
Yeah, especially since France had multiple revolutions. That's the funny thing about France, eh?
They like change, and it's understandable. People want to change sometimes, and when it comes to monarchy and stuff like that, having the poor go against the rich and the wealthy and the better off makes sense. Those people want to see change more than anyone. So
yeah, definitely,
understandable they would be the first ones to rise up. So I'm glad that that the Doctor sees this go on at all, and I'm glad that later on the Doctor still holds the French in his heart, of course. Because
Susan actually says that's his favourite period in his history as well, is the Reign of Terror.
Yeah, so that whole time, and I imagine that Paris and France is one of the greatest times that he liked as well. I mean,
Yeah.
I imagine that just France in general is probably one of his more favorite holiday places.
Yeah, well, because the Fourth Doctor goes there.
Yep,
Yeah, quite the Eighth Doctor goes there.
yep,
A lot of the Doctors spend time in France. The 10th Doctor goes
yeah,
there.
yep.
He loves
He goes,
France, man.
yeah. Tin does actually spend a lot of time there.
Yeah.
He ends up with Madame de Pompadour.
Madame de Pompadour, yeah, that's amazing.
Great stuff.
Yeah, I think even though the stakes didn't turn up being in that high, just because I'm seeing it from the future, the Reign of Terror is great. Again, I see it as my least favorite, only because the stakes. I don't know. I feel because the Reign of Terror relies heavily on its stakes.
Yeah,
Because
but
a
of
lot
course a
of the
lot of
cliffhangers, I like that.
a lot of season ending, the end of the series or season episodes always seem to have that sort of feel, even if they don't do the the find out next season if everyone dies sort of thing. Like even if they don't have that, they always try and play that people might die card.
Yeah,
Which is fair enough, but if you're going to go for it, this might be a series ending death. That's not something that it's not something that holds up over time
yeah,
anyway, because people
because you,
know that the season's going to carry on. But
yeah,
having a likable character maybe would have probably been a better choice. But that's
yeah,
just I imagine these people didn't the writers and stuff did not imagine that this show was going to last 50 odd years.
yeah.
So
It
I don't
was meant to
imagine
be
they
just a
thought.
time filler as well. It was meant to just fill a slot for a wee bit, and then it just got huge, and then they
Yeah,
kept it
but
going.
I very much imagine they didn't think, oh, if this gets big, people might not have the same feeling about this if they know that people are going to survive. It's definitely not something that would have gone through their minds.
No, definitely. Unless they had the Oracle of Gallifrey, I don't think they would be able to see that. But yeah, so bringing this to a close. I feel for me, the Reign of Terror is the weakest, only because the stakes are removed, and the strongest for me is the Edge of Destruction because it's 2 episodes long, and you see tons of the TARDIS in this, and
Mm.
Time Lords sleep on what looks like the most uncomfortable beds in the universe.
But they come out of the walls. Like,
Yeah,
that's amazing. That was just the I love the special effects in the original TARDIS where it was
yeah,
all man and wire stuff. It was
yeah,
so good, especially considering like the sound effects didn't add up. Like
yeah,
the first few times that the TARDIS doors would open and close, it would make the sounds for a little like a few seconds, and then it would suddenly start to move. Like,
yeah.
and then it would move in
The
such
the
like an awkward moment. It was so
and for you, Harriet Skelly, you're high and low for the season.
Well, of course, my low
Yeah,
would be the Keys of Marinus, as I said
yeah,
before. Simply because I just couldn't get through it. But of course, my highs, the great ones, other than the Daleks, it is going to be Marco Polo. Even though I couldn't, even though I couldn't see the whole thing, of course. The fact that that it holds up, even though I'm just imagining what's going on in,
yeah.
just it really speaks to how great of a story that it is. So those are my feelings on the first greatness season. So,
Well, that's
yeah,
good. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on Whoscussion. So I think next week we will definitely have to go over either season 2 or maybe a big finish arc. But I think season 2 probably will be our next port of call. Thank you very much for tuning in for this episode of Whoscussion. You've all been lovely.